Jabril Robinson was murdered May 16, 2016 in Clayton County, Georgia. Officer Charlie McDaniel radioed for backup, in which Dwayne Parkins was dispatched to the scene. Once Dwayne Parkins arrived on the scene, he came in contact with my son and immediately shot him in the back of his head.
Harry Baxter Jr. was killed by Oakland police on January the 16th, 2011. He ran up the street, and the neighbors of seeing him run up both streets, and they said he was zigzagging, and they were and there was a guy chasing him and shooting at him, and he hit him in the back with a bullet, and Kerry fell to the ground.
Marquise Jones was killed by San Antonio police. On that day, I was getting ready for work, and I saw there was a shooting at Chacho's and Chaluchi's around 5 in the morning. And I remember saying they need to close their restaurant down because it is always someone being killed there. There's always fights there, always this. And I see the yellow chalk tarp, and I say, Lord, bless their family. I could hear my sister crying, who is Marquise's son, saying they killed him. I remembering I could not breathe. I could not catch my breath.
Jacob Dominguez was murdered by San Jose Police Department on September 15, 2017. Officer Michael Pena, part of a covert response unit, on unmarked cars, no sirens, no lights, plainclothes officers boxed in Jacob, killing him within 20 seconds of having him contained. No de-escalation. After he was dead, they put in the canine to maul up his throat.
My name is Monty Benjamin, the mother of Javis Benjamin, who was killed by Officer Lynn Thomas of the Avondale State Police Department on January 18, 2013. Javis was not looking in the direction of Officer Thomas. He was engaging with the people in the community. Officer Thomas began to move backwards. Javis then looked in his direction. At this time, Officer Thomas then shot Javis twice, once in the heart and the other in the lower abdomen with his hands raised.
My name is Adrienne Hood, the mother of Henry Green V, who was killed by 2 plainclothes police officers here in Columbus, Ohio, June 6 of 2016. Many of the witnesses that were outside said that the officers never identified themselves. They jumped out the vehicle, all while firing at my son. My son, Henry, was shot 8 times from a total of 22 bullets that were fired at him. And he lay on the sidewalk and took his last breaths.
My name is Janet Baker. My son was heinously murdered by someone who was supposed to serve and protect him. When I wake up in the morning, my son is the first thing on my mind. When I go to bed at night, I labor. Did I do the right things? Did I make the right calls? Did I align myself with the right groups? Did I speak out for justice enough? Or did I say the wrong things? Did I somehow hinder getting justice for it?
My name is Geraldine Brown Bluford, the mother of Alan Dwayne Bluford, who was killed by Oakland Police Department officer Miguel Masso on May the 6th of 2012. Alan, who was not under arrest, not read any Miranda rights, began to leave. As he was walking away from the scene, the police officer turned off his lapel camera and began to chase Allen. Allen was running, according to witness statements, yelling, "I didn't do anything." The officer took out his weapon, shooting himself in the foot. Allen heard the gunshot and fell to the ground with hands up. According to witness statements, the police officer walked over to Allen as he was lying on the ground and shot him in his chest 3 times.
My name is Sheila Banks, the godmother and auntie of Corey Jones that was killed by Newman Roger, October 18, 2015. Police officer Newman Roger approached him, and within a few seconds or so, Corey was running for his life. He was shot at 6 times. He was hit 3 times. And boy, I tell you, our lives have never been the same.
My name is Kathy Scott Lights, the mother of Jarvis Lights, who was killed by a Georgia State Trooper on December 29, 2017. They stated that Jarvis exited his vehicle. There was no body cam or dash cam to confirm this statement. It was reported that Jarvis attempted to return back to his car when Officer Nolan attacked him from the back of his body. Jarvis came back up out of his car after he found what he was searching for with his arms raised in the air. State Trooper Nolan stated that he didn't know what that object was in Jarvis' hand, and he shot Jarvis in his right upper shoulder arm. And the object that was in Jarvis' hand was his cell phone, which was found next to his body after he had been shot on the ground, bleeding out.
Welcome to our Voices of Struggle and Hope, Mothers Speak Out Against Police Brutality. This is our last installment of a series of 10 dialogues that have been happening the entire week, starting November 14th until today. The dialogues were held daily at 12 noon and 7 p.m. So this is the last installment, and we welcome everybody and thank you for your participation and your attendance tonight. The MAPB fellows will share and have shared their direct experiences of losing a child or a loved one to police violence. Their stories are the first-person truth behind the 1,000 fatal police shootings documented in America each year. I'm Colette Flanagan, founder of Mothers Against Police Brutality, and I will be moderating this last session this evening. And I want to thank my co-founder, John Fullenwider, who is a longtime human rights activist and organizer in Dallas, for partnering with me all week and moderating these amazing week-long dialogues with the MAPB fellows and our incredible panelists that we've had with us this week. I founded Mothers Against Police Brutality because a police officer in Dallas, Texas, murdered my son, my only son, Clinton Allen. Clinton was only 25 years old, Black man, father of twin infant boys. Clinton was unarmed the night that he was killed on March 10th in 2013, when a Dallas officer shot him 7 times, 5 times in the center mass, 1 time in his left arm that was raised, and once at close range in the back. Clinton's killing contained almost every dimension of current issues in policing in the United States. My son was Black, and a Black person is 2.5 times more likely to be shot to death by police in America. My son was unarmed, and yet he was perceived by a fully armed white officer as a lethal threat. The officer that killed my son, Clinton, escaped all criminal and civil accountability. for killing my son. No charges, no indictment, no trial, no damages. MAPB has two major initiatives that we've worked on this year. And the first is taking this issue of police violence and extrajudicial killings to the United Nations. Our organization is working with groups within the United Nations at the high court level, which is phenomenal. And I am just recently back from Geneva and participating in the United Nations 52nd Human Rights Council session with the High Court. This work is important at this level because police brutality is global and it's a global problem and it needs global attention. Second initiative is the MAPB Fellowship Legacy Program. The MAPB Legacy Fellowship Program is a leadership development initiative operating in 10 cities. Out of hundreds of applicants, these 10 special women were chosen to lead in the MAPB Legacy Program. The fellows are women who have endured the loss of a child or loved one to deadly police violence, police brutality. Each has a track record of advocating for their martyred children, a loved one, and organizing for change in their hometowns and in each of their communities. The MAPB Fellowship Program is a key component in the continuing development of our national network of families that we've developed, of families that are directly impacted by police violence. This program teaches and empowers the fellows to become leaders and change agents in their communities and leaders in the largest scope of this movement against police brutality. Our fellow on the panel this evening is Janet Baker. Janet is a MAPB fellow. Janet's son, Jordan, was killed by Houston police on January 16, 2014. And Janet has advocated for justice for her son since he was killed in 2014. Our panelists joining us this evening are Angelique Davis and Dana Miller-Pike. Ms. Davis is a professor of political science and African American studies at Seattle University. Her research concentrates on racial gaslighting, apologies and reparations, the socio-legal construction of race, the political representation of non-white Americans, and the reinvention of white supremacy in the 21st century. Her published articles are in several journals, including the Journal of Black Studies, the Black Scholar, Berkeley, La Raza Law Journal, and Studies in Law, Politics, and Society. She is in the process of writing another book titled No Human Involved, 3/5 Justice in the United States. Wow, Ms. Davis, incredible. Thank you so much. We are honored to have you as a panelist this evening for Janet's panel. Thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about your broad spectrum of your amazing work and research, and how in your studies on racial disparities and the reinvention of white supremacy in the 21st century, particularly how it correlates with police violence against people of color, particularly Black people in America.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for this invitation. I'm just honored to be here, and thank you for the work that you're doing. I'd say first and foremost, I'm here because of the honor of getting to know Janet over the years and her story, and also following the work that she's been doing. But I'd also say before I get into my work, I'm a Black mother of 4. But for the grace of God, my children are here, right? I have 3 girls and 1 boy. And honestly, being a mother and being a political science and also professor of African and African American studies, decided that I needed to use my my work and my research and platform to support this work in whatever way I could moving forward. And so looking at how I could use my research and documentation to also support the movement that you're all doing. So just thank you for the honor to be here, and thank you for the most important work you're doing on behalf of all of our families. We're very grateful. So I know we'll be getting into it more later, but essentially I've been an academic. I'm also a lawyer. I practiced law before I became a professor, but I asked the questions that clients didn't necessarily want to pay for, the ones about why the system is the way it is and how could we change and make things different. And that led me to my research regarding looking at the court system and racial gaslighting. And then ultimately, and I'll talk about this more later, I had the opportunity to meet Janet in 2015 at the Million Mom March in Washington, D.C. Maria Hamilton had organized that, and a number of other women came together. And when I was there, I heard people talking about the police slang term that some of you may have heard, NHI, which stands for no human involved. And I'm sure, like many of you, it just actually made my blood run cold hearing that. And so I decided to start researching that. And so that's the research that I've been doing, and I will tie in later in our discussion. So thank you.
Thank you so much again for that. We really appreciate it. Our next panelist is Dana Miller-Pike. Dana is a longtime activist, artist, teacher, and social worker. Dana has 30 plus years of experience in grief work and dismantling systems and institutions of racist oppression. Her career has taken her from in-home hospice care in underserved neighborhoods to the Dallas County Jail, and in recent years, the movement against police brutality. She is a passionate believer in a creative art and street theater for social change, as well as a lifelong learner. Dana has a love for volunteers and is grateful to work with Mothers Against Police Brutality. Thank you, Dana, so much for being here tonight and for your selfless giving of yourself in this movement. We are honored to have you as a panelist as well tonight, and the important work that you do at MAPB in working with our families in the delicate need of grief counseling and trauma. So we appreciate you being here. If you would, tell us a little bit about your work and how you've been able to embed your love for art and the social worker experience and helping impacted families by police violence, and certainly your experience with trauma and helping families.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm just honored to be here, and it's really a privilege to sit on this panel with Janet and with Miss Davis. Well, you know, from the beginning as an activist, I noticed that, you know, a picture really does paint 1,000, words. And so we've often used, even in the movement against police brutality in Dallas, we've used the Light Brigade and various types of, visual images. We've done a number of funerals with, bodies of those who died of police brutality in front of the police station, et cetera. So always just looking to, create a picture. But, what I'm most interested in right now is working with families and with learning from them, because what I really have noticed early on in this one, from the minute I became involved in this movement, is the unique grief of those families who lose a child to police brutality. And I was so grateful to be able to speak a few years ago in Sarajevo at an international women's conference on the unique grief of mothers and women who lose a child to police brutality. And, the international community is really watching. They really know that the United States is unfortunately the forerunner in this horrible, normalizing, police brutality and police murders. So I'm learning and very interested always in the healing of the trauma cycle. And so I'm just pleased to be here tonight and looking forward to hearing Ms. Baker's story. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here again. Thank you for that, Dana. Janet, thank you so much for being here tonight to tell your story. This is your panel. This panel is designed to give you the time and to tell your story. As we often know, most families are voiceless or are the last voice and on panels when they have 2 or 3 minutes to tell their story. But so this is your panel tonight, and your panelists are here to support you. And I want to start with asking you to tell us about Jordan, who he was and the things that he enjoyed in life.
Okay. I guess I just want to start out by offering a caveat of please forgive me. I've been so careful and guarded about even just saying who Jordan was and is in my heart, just because all I have is his memories. And it's a fragile treasure that I guard so closely. I guard it with my life. And saying who he was and who he is in my heart, a great, strong, beautiful soul, an amazing father, and my only child. And thinking of your only child and what it means to be a parent and the part about how we're supposed to protect them, and knowing who Jordan was, I have to say, I thought that I was very fortunate. I never had any problems with Jordan. He was always a very great kid. And I noticed at an early age that he had a knack for being a great storyteller. He was really animated when he would tell a story. He would draw you in, and it was somehow, I don't know, it would just always make you feel like you were right there at the moment, him telling that story and being very, just a real good jovial person, a really great individual who always had a heart for others as well. I can't even remember when I was saying early on, he had an assignment. He was and I worked, and after school, I think he was maybe about 7, and there was a program, they were going on a field trip, and he was asking me, hey, pack these snacks. They had to have a brown paper sack lunch, money to get in, and the trip was to a place called Funplex. And it's here in Houston. Well, it was years ago. And during the trip, it was a lot of different events that happened. And when I picked him up, the caregiver, their teacher was saying, oh, Jordan will tell you all about it. There was a lot going on. He mentioned, I said, well, what happened? And I said, she looked so disheveled. And he said, it wasn't a good trip. I said, okay. He was tasked with writing an assignment. And I said, well, tell me about it. And he titled it the trip to Funplex that was no fun. And then he started telling all of the stories about what happened from the onset. There was one mishap after another. The van broke down. And if anyone knows, you're in Dallas, and in Houston, it's extremely hot and humid. And they were sitting on the side of the road, and he was saying, my mom packed a lunch. Can I get that lunch she had for me? And she was like, no, it's not time. And he said, nobody stopped. No one came to help. And she was still trying to be very optimistic. And she told them, hey guys, someone's going to help us. We're going to get started. We're going to get on the way. One guy stopped after a long time. And I remember him saying, the guy just said, y'all need to call a ride. And then that was it. That was the help that they gave. And he had me I was hysterically I was laughing so hard, and it just made me resonate the joy that I had that was sparked from Jordan and his personality. And it carried on through his teen years. I never had any issues with him. He was just he was always a joy to be around. And one of his greatest accomplishments, and he would say it if he were here, was being a dad. And his son was his world and everything. And I noticed that, excuse me, his son was like a driving force, a guide. Everything that he did in his life was, for his son and to have a great life for them and to create a good life for them. He started out working and he went to school, and he was going to be a welder and a CNC machinist. And he mentioned that it was levels to it, and he was going to start out getting the certification as a welder, and then the CNC machinist, and then to continue to get his bachelor's. And he said, this is going to provide the income for the lifestyle that I want for my child. And I couldn't be prouder. And I just remember that continual basis and the love that he had, it spilled over. Some of his, you say, what was his hobbies? And I would always often say he found joy in being a dad and finding cool ways. He said that his child was like his little homie. And he said I could see the joy in his eyes. And that's one thing that I greatly miss. And one other story, bear with me, like you said, this is our panel, and I'm trying really desperate, as I am, and I stated before, very guarded on Jordan's stories and just what I share. I do remember an incident, and that was very indicative of who he was as a person, and he always fought for the underdog. And I do remember him calling me. I was at my office, and he said, hey, I was distracted and I was doing something else, and I was saying, okay, yeah, what's going on? And he said, hey, G Mama. And that was what he called me. He said, I have a friend, he was wrongfully terminated. And I said, okay, so, and he said, y'all having a hiring? I said, Jordan, I know, but he said, G Mama, please. And I stopped, and I could hear the concern in his voice. And I said, okay, send me his resume. And during the expo, I'll look into it. I hired him, and that young man became a lead at the facility. He was so grateful for the position. And that was very indicative of Jordan. He was always the person who would try to wrong a right or wrong. And he would always be the person to advocate for those who maybe was the underdog. And in a nutshell, as I stated before, he was my only child, and he was my everything. And that would sum up who Jordan was and is in my heart.
Thank you so much for that, Janet. I felt so much of a kindred spirit with some of the things that you were sharing that remind me of Clinton. Thank you for telling us about Jordan. When a person is killed by the police, he or she is typically portrayed in a negative way, right?
Right.
And in most cases, their lives are so rewritten by the police department as a way to substantiate the killing. And so that the victim reemerges as a completely different person. When people are hearing about who this person was that was killed by the police, their character is totally assassinated. A mother can hardly recognize her child by the police department description or the media portrayal in the aftermath of a shooting. So we always want to ground our reflection in the lived experience of families who have suffered, this horrible crime, and take the narrative back of who our children and loved ones were So I really appreciate you for that, for sharing that about Jordan. The next thing I want to ask you, and I know it's probably going to be a little difficult, but we have to continue to share our stories from truth into power so that people never forget. Can you take us back to the day that Jordan was murdered by police? Can you tell us what happened that day?
That was me taking that virtual deep breath. And I have worked on projects, and I was fortunate enough to meet other moms, and I would always ask them, tell us the day, because that's the day that your life was tragically altered forever. And in that moment, and the notification and receiving the information. So on that day, I remember, again, I think work, that was my passion. And I was at the office and I said, you know what, I'm gonna go somewhere. I'm gonna go and out to dinner. I called my best friend and I said, hey, there's City Center. It's right up the road. Meet me there and let's have dinner. And I said, a cocktail. She said, what? Okay. I'm not a drinker. So she said, yeah, sure. This sounds like fun. And I was packing, throwing things in a bag. And I said, I'm not going to see this again until Monday. And I got a call from my mom. And she stated that, Jan, there was a guy, he came by, he was looking for Jordan. He's in a suit. He wouldn't tell me any information. He said he only needed to speak to you. And I thought that was the weirdest thing ever. And I said, well, what's his name? Where is he from? And she said, I have a card. Let me get you his number. And I was thinking, my mom and dad were, at home, just getting back from dialysis. It was a homicide detective. So I remembered calling and, when you get the feeling that someone is just being untruthful and they're not saying anything, he has a job. He needs to report the news, report to the next of kin. And he stated, where are you? And I said, who are you, first of all? And what do you need? He said, yes, I need to talk to you about Jordan. I said, what about Jordan? He said, hey, well, where are you? I'll come and meet you. And I just thought that was, of course, this is not in our world. This is the oddest thing ever. I stated, okay, I don't want you to meet me. My sister also works for the police department. So I told him, I said, let me give you a call back. I immediately called her and said, hey, do you know this guy? Look him up, in their system. I said, F6 and see what's going on. She said, yeah, he is a detective, Jan. And she said, well, do you want to come here? And I thought, she said, well, come here and I'll have a meeting. She was still at work. She said, he can meet us at the storefront, the police storefront that she was working at. And I said, okay, sure, I'll get there. And I started getting so nervous. Immediately, I start calling Jordan, like blowing up his phone. This was odd. He wasn't answering. And what his friends would call him, like, you're a mama's boy. I was always like, with a quickness. And I wouldn't have to search for him, or it wasn't hard to track him down. So I mentioned, I said, he didn't answer the phone. So I called and I spoke to his son's mother, and I said, hey, send a text message and say, this is from little Jordan. Daddy called me right away. And so I knew he's gonna, whatever's going on, he's gonna stop what he's doing immediately. And she said, Jan, he didn't respond to my text. I just remember my stomach just dropped. And I know my heart skipped a couple of beats. It just was this weird vibe that he's not, and I'm not able to locate him. So I called my friend back. We were already set to meet. And I said, I don't know what's going on. And I just I'm worried because my sister was saying, Jan, get here and just come to the storefront. You know, the aftermath, I think she knew. My best friend comes to pick me up, and I remember her little BMW was so low to the ground. And I hopped in, and she's speeding, and we're going through traffic trying to get there. And she keeps looking at me, and she said, "You all right?" I'm hyperventilating. I said, "No." I said, Yolanda, I don't know. I just have a bad feeling, and I'm in no rush to get to the bad feeling. In my wildest dreams, I never thought that he wouldn't be here. So we get to the storefront, and there was the homicide detective. I think they had their uh, when they provide the notification, they have a group of people. So it was 2 other people, and they were kind of in the background. She was parking the car, and we're rushing to get in. I step in and I say, he said, "Are you the mother?" I said, "Yes." And he started saying, this happened the night before. He said, at 7 point, and all I heard him say, your son was killed. And I collapsed. I dropped to the floor. And by then, my best friend's coming in to the storefront. They had like a little conference room that they ushered us into. And she just kept looking, and I'm screaming and crying and rocking. And my sister put her arms around me. And then I look back because I'm in shock. You know, they say your life goes before your eyes, you know, like your life flashes before you. I just remembered thinking, I yelled, I said, I don't have anything. At that point, I'm trying to rationalize it. I'm not really being cogent, but I said it. I don't have anything. I don't have anything, because at that moment, you know, everything's gone.
Right.
So I look back at my best friend, and she was crying, and it's like we've been friends since we were 4. The pain that I felt is in the disbelief, going through the shock and the denial. It's like we were having a language of grief, to where she was telling me through these nonverbal cues that this is the worst thing that's happened to us. We have boys that were a year apart. I'm her child's godmother. And this happened to our family. This happened to the extensive family. And we're wondering, how did it happen to Jordan? When I collapsed on the floor and I was crying, and I remember my shoe flew off, and he said, "Leave her on the floor." This was the detective. And it's like my spirit just quickened. And I said, "Okay, you need your faculties about you." I got up and I wanted to look him in his eye. And I thought, "You're going to tell me what happened to my child." And I just remember that feeling, that brokenness. And he was saying a lot, and I was already thinking ahead, thinking out of just not being able to really verbalize, but just that pain. And I remember praying. We were praying on the way there, and I just kept praying, praying, praying. And then that sick feeling, I left, and we all gathered at my sister's place. And that was the notification. I started calling family. And I said, okay, my brother was in Saudi Arabia. He worked for Saudi Aramco. I didn't know what time it was. And he was like, wow. He said, I was just getting into whatever time or what. And I started, he said, Jan, what is it? Because I was crying. And I said, Jordan. He said, what happened to Jordan? And then I'm making one call after another. And I didn't want anyone else to say it because I couldn't hear it again. I know that sounds crazy, but I had to be the one to say what had happened. So as I'm explaining to him and making the calls, all of my family, it's like, okay, this high alert. Everybody came from great nieces, my family, my brothers, friends. Everybody just kind of showed up at Jenny's, and then we were tasked with we have to go and tell my mom and dad. And my dad, everybody in the family knew. We always call my dad Big Pop. And he and Jordan had such an amazing relationship. And I was telling everybody because I had to be the one to say it. And he came in and he was legally blind. And he was just looking and he said, "What is it? Because why is everybody here?" And I said, "Pop." And I just couldn't say anything. And then my brother just yelled out, because he's angry at this point. He's ready to start marching, doing whatever. And he said, an officer killed Jordan. An officer murdered Jordan. And then I just remember my dad, he yelled, and they were trying to keep him from falling. And he was going back to his room, and he was just, unconsolable. It was the worst. And I just kept looking in his eyes, and he had these beautiful light brown eyes, and just this, it was a sadness he had. And he said, "Jan," I said I was going to do this. He said, "Jan, they killed my boy." And the pain that I felt was, I don't have any answers, Dad. We're going to do what we need to do. And he was saying, "What happened?" And that's what everybody's saying. What happened? How could this have happened? And I thought, oh, Jordan's such a good person. In my mind, I didn't realize how naive I was. I felt like it's going to be easy. It was a mistake. This person had hate in his heart. You took something so precious. And I know it's going to be a way where we can figure out. I know there's going to be a way where we're going to vindicate. I know there's going to be a way for justice. And I just kept praying. And then what happened next was they were scrambling. And I do remember that officer saying, when I asked him to meet me at the storefront, I said, "My sister works for the police department." He says, "She's an officer?" As somehow Jordan would have mattered then. And I said, "No, she's a crisis, she's a counselor." And at that moment, I felt we're going to be able to straighten this out. In the aftermath and what ensued, the news report, the statements that were made, and the aftermath, and what we know is the spin has to happen. Right. And the way the report read, there was a string of robberies. They start thinking of all of these things that happened in the area that occurred, and robbery suspect. And that was the first report, because they're, getting everything armed to protect the officer. And I just remember my friend saying, "You need to call this activist and you need to call this person." And I'm completely out of it. But the news said the lie. I'm going to go back to the news so we can turn that lie around. And there was, I think his name was Simon Gutierrez, a news reporter. And my friends, they gathered up. This is the following day after we had the task of telling everyone in the family. I said, "We need to straighten out what was said." And in my mind, I was saying, they need to know who, I need to change what was stated. The robbery suspect, And what made him a suspect to the level of your assigning him. And they said he fit the description, the normal things. He fit the description. I was in fear for my life. He reached into his waistband, and to tell that night later, because we're piecing together what had occurred, that night, Jordan was at my sister's place, and he was downloading music. And he said there was a TV show on MTV where the exes were they were all in a house, like a really nice place, and then the exes would show up, and they're having a great time, and he was thinking, what a way to destroy a vibe, and he was saying, I gotta see this show. I canceled cable because it's too expensive and I'm a single dad. And I remembered he was watching it at Jenny's place, and she said the alarm went off, and she went to pick my parents up from dialysis. And she said she looked back. Jordan really wanted to watch the show. And she said, no, you go ahead, watch the show, because that was a part of his, he took that on willingly, where he took care, you start taking care of the parents. And on that night, she said, Jordan left. And we had no idea that he wasn't here. And I had talked to him the night prior, and he was telling me about the school. He was telling me about they changed campuses, and he was saying how he rode his bike, around the neighborhood, little short places, running errands. And as part of Jordan's story being, meeting the tragic end, we always, and I'm sure all the other 9 fellows, we played our sons what could have happened, every little nuance, on repeat. And as I'm sure that you can attest to as well, Colette. But on that night, he apparently, I don't know, he he drove home, hopped on his bike, and he didn't bring his phone. He was having problems with the phone, and then he was healthy, and he would always tell me, why are you eating that burger? He would tell me, get vegetables on it, do this. So there's a Subway there. And I was thinking Jordan was going in, and if he walked in and the contents didn't look fresh, he'd walk out. And him being in that area, which he had every right to be, and the officer saying he fit the description through meeting with the district attorneys and trying to piece together what occurred. The description was a Black male, 5'8", I think 5'8" to 6'2", 160 pounds to 200. That's the neighborhood. I'm like, if that's not racially profiling and his civil liberties being violated, because he should have been able to roam to and fro, hopping on his bike 3 blocks away from his apartment, and he was gone forever from our lives. And I promised I wouldn't get so emotional, and I know you were saying this is for the panels. I'd be remiss in not allowing the panelists to speak. But I just, in telling Jordan's story and that night, because I have been so guarded, he was murdered. It was, he fit the description in this broad description. And the officer says he was in fear for his life. It's almost the checklist of what, can be stated. And with that checklist, this was in efforts to clear the officer. The officer approached Jordan, and when he approached Jordan, the way the report read, a scuffle ensued. During the scuffle, his hooded sweatshirt was removed. He had bruises from the top of his head. His shoulder was cut open. and he had scratches and bruises all up and down the back of his body. And scuffle ensued. The officer didn't have a mark on him. And I don't know, a lot of did, was revealed through discovery, but Jordan didn't have any defensive wounds. So it leads you to understand, what truly happened on that January 16th night. He was running, and then they said he fled. I say he was running in fear for his life. And he was cornered in an alleyway. And I had to add this part because he wasn't treated like a human. First of all, he was dehumanized to the level of, he laid him in trash, he hog-tied him, and then he watched him bleed out. And he didn't call for help, no medical assistance. And Jordan was pronounced dead on the scene at 8:45 that night. So with that, just knowing part of his story, I hate that that's the end, that tragic end for his story. And I just a constant with prayers and saying, what's next? And how do you change? How do you bring about change that, as we fight for our individual children, on the collective, what can be done? And thank you. I am all over the place, but that's Jordan's story. And I'm hoping for more to the story soon.
Thank you so much for that, Janet. I know that took a lot out of you, and each time we have to tell our story, it's almost like you don't have a choice, because if you don't tell the story, then you lose the ending, no matter how terrible it is. And I always say, when policemen kill, they don't realize that they take away everything. They take away their first day at school, their first Christmas, their first steps to you, the time that child was handed to you after coming out of labor. They take away everything because they try and rewrite their whole story. And then in the end, how they are killed and suffer is so egregious until it consumes most of some of the other memories, because you're so consumed with how could someone have treated my child like this, another human being. And it makes so I want to circle back to Angelique, because she said something earlier about NHI. A lot of people have not heard that acronym and what it stands for. I'd like for you to elaborate a little bit on that, Angelique, because what I have learned and working in this movement and being at many tables and educating people on police brutality, a lot of my friends, both Black and white, could not understand. What do you mean? How what do you mean somebody killed Clinton? I mean, what did he do? Right? And so, because when the media reports it, it's man shot by police on the east side. They don't see what police brutality really looks like, what we see and what you have learned and what you see through families, the bodies that are bullet ridden and beaten as Jordan was. So they never see that. I'd like to hear your take on that.
Yes, thank you. If it's okay, I'm going to pull up a couple slides I have just to share, if that's all right, about NHI. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but are you seeing the, here we go. So essentially, this term, I'll give a little bit of the background about it and then talk about how I see it relates to specifically, of course, Janet's story. And then I'm sure there's so much that relates to the woman in the fellowship. And so, first of all, just this definition, I think you all have heard it, but so many people haven't, even though it's been around for some time. So NHI stands for no human involved, and it's defined, it's actually founded in the Oxford English. It's US police slang for no humans involved. It's an informal classification assigned to a crime or an individual, actually giving it low priority because its victim is regarded as having a low social status. Couple other definitions I came across, then I'll just share a little bit more with the background. Another one was from the Routledge Dictionary. It talks about it's used for describing a crime against a criminal, especially when involving only Black people. And another one that came from Police Slang Dictionary says it's a cynical way to take a murder or other case as not very important, as it rests on the assumption that Blacks, Indians, etc., are not human. And so in the interviews that I did and talking with former police chiefs and officers and looking at this, I actually traced it from the earliest inception I found was in I want to say the 40s, but really traced how the war on drugs and the war on crime and the militarization of the police. And so creating with the war, right, is dehumanizing the enemy. And so we've always had dehumanizing of Black people from our nation's inception. But then we add on the war on crime, and we know, like with that, the Southern strategy and what was happening as far as really trying to target Black folks as the problem when we weren't, right? That essentially this was part of a broader strategy for law enforcement. And so essentially, you know, dehumanizing a whole segment of the population. I'm not going to go through all this, but just to talk a little bit about what some of my research has shown is, so first of all, that NHI is part of what I call NHI PC or NHI police culture, because the culture within policing, if you really look at it, is one of dehumanization, right? And so this explains, for example, why so many of the different cases that, you know, either it took a long time for the police to respond, or in the case of Jordan Baker, right, he was shot, hogtied, and left to bleed out without any medical attention, just absolute disregard for human life. And I think what's pretty enlightening too is, for example, I'm in the city of Seattle. There are so many protections regarding like how dogs are treated, how animals are treated, right? And people will often call, you know, for emergency assistance for a dog, you know, being injured. And there's some articles actually out there, academic articles that look at how in some places animals are treated better and get a better response from law enforcement than do Black folks in these situations. And so one of the things that in looking at this, I really tied it back to the 3/5 compromise and Black people being right, counted as 3/5 of a person for right purposes for voting for the Electoral College. But this dehumanization in the structure of our Constitution, the structure of our legal system, right, is become what I call 3/5 justice, and that Black folks never get full justice. Right. So just like Janet said, her sister worked right at I can't tell you how many people I have interviewed and mothers who, you know, had somebody in the family that worked in law enforcement, even expected that somehow they were going to get, you know, fair treatment in this process, and found out that they were just another Negro like everybody else. Right. And I think this really goes to fundamentally this dehumanization that is so deeply embedded in our system, and that so many of us have believed, and many of us mistakenly believe, right, that we would somehow get justice out of the system. And we see time and time again, it doesn't matter your class status, if you are Black and this happens, right, you are going to receive, the whole system is set up for you to receive less than justice would be for white people. And that's why I call it 3/5 justice. And I think at every turn, right? And so I think there's just a couple, things when we talk about also, how does this tie in, right? When you're even going into legal cases. So like what Janet was talking about, and you all are very intimately familiar with, right? There's this whole objectively reasonable standard and the reasonable officer standard. And the question that I really keep coming back to is, what is objectively reasonable if an officer believes that they're engaging with an NHI? So if we're actually, there's overwhelming evidence that officers, right, of the implicit bias rampant, but there's also very clear, it's not just implicit bias, but just flat out racism and bias that's happening. And I document this in my research. It's still forthcoming, but it's close to coming out. But if there actually, right, is a culture within the department of believing that they and treating people as less than human, then how is that even a reasonable officer standard, right? Because it actually takes that outside the realm of reasonableness, because who then are they dealing with if they're not dealing with a human, right? Is it an animal? Are they thinking of this as a monster? Like, and there's a lot of people that talk about this in the academic context, but right, there's people who talk about some officers, if you think in the war context, there's like enemy combatants, right? Like, the others, that we're dealing with. And there's a whole area of research that talks about an area you may have heard of called necropolitics, but it's about the politics actually of death, and the state or the government has the power to decide who lives or dies, right? And it's embedded in the culture. And then, like was said earlier by Dana, this normalization of police brutality and murder. And that really, I'll just show a couple of quick things, and I'm going to talk about how that ties into racial gaslighting, and then I'll wrap up unless there's final comments. But, as I was doing the research, and I'm sure many of you have seen this, but for people who may be watching it, if you start really looking into like lawsuits against law enforcement, like the text messages, the language that they're using behind the scenes emails, right? And then even this culture of like t-shirts that they wear. So like, for example, I have this whole slideshow that just shows, for example, here's an on-duty New York Police Department squad officer who's wearing a t-shirt that says on the back, a quote from Ernest Hemingway, right? There's no hunting like the hunting of man. And those who have hunted our men long enough and liked it never care for anything else thereafter, right? Just how absolutely, right? And then, for example, this was for sale on Amazon until just not too long ago. I kept complaining to them that they were selling this, but BDRT t-shirts, Baby Daddy Removal Team, right? Here's a picture that I took. And it's just, over, even a onesie, right? This was on sale not too long ago. And so I show this because I also just wanted to add that on top of it, so I had done this research, started in some of my earlier research on apologies and reparations, and looking at how racism is constantly changing, right, based on our historical context, right? Because there's a certain type that was going on during enslavement, Jim Crow, right? We had the civil rights, so we know. Then there's the colorblind racism, right? All these different ways it manifests. So one of the things I and my co-author Rose Ernst had looked at was how are the political narratives and ways of not only framing what is happening in political discourse, but also with the courts, how is that influenced also, and how is white supremacy essentially being maintained over time? And so what we did is we actually looked at the process of something called political spectacles and looked at it in a racial context. And basically we wrote about racial spectacles and how narratives are used to hide racism, to normalize racism and make it part of the white, right, racist power structure. And they take those, and then there's a process of racial gaslighting that's either used, right? So when our families are challenging in court, it's either one, made to make us look like we're unstable or unreasonable. I can't tell you how many different cases I've listened in on or shadowed families or talked to officers, and they act like the family's demands are completely unreasonable, right? Again, right, it's part of the framing. And just like you're saying, when the questions of how did people find out, and that story over and over and over again, I have talked to women and other family members who, right, they are questioned like their child was a criminal, or they're even told, right? So a complete dehumanization of the family, right? And that's historical. We know that since the inception of our time here, right, our familial rights to our children, to our families have never been honored. But we're seeing that manifesting in a different way now, right? And so the gaslighting that also happens though, right? So the families that believed, oh, my loved one, my mom used to work for, my sister works there, they're going to do the right thing, right? And then this, wait, what happened? So then people sometimes start to question their perceptions. But also for those of us who have no question, we know exactly what's going on, but the way the narrative is and what we call it in racial gaslighting is it's pathologizing or criminalizing, right? People who resist the dominant narrative. So if you're challenging, right, so they're going to try to make the victim, right, of course, they're creating their case from day one, right?
Exactly.
Interest from the very beginning, right? The police department, there should be an independent party investigating, but we know that's not how it works, right? Office of Internal Affairs, we have an OPA here, like, I know different departments have, but essentially the Internal Investigations Unit, right? We know that is fraught because they're investigating their own, right? So from the very beginning, they're creating the case to protect themselves. They are not there to deliver the message, be a support, of your family in this process. It's all about defending themselves. And they're also using racial gaslighting as part of that, right? Because there's all these different mechanisms to try to make us look like we're unreasonable, make our children look like somehow they were deserving of their fate. And the fact that, right, that we know that our children, right, I have kids, I mean, who doesn't, that we all messed up, right, at some point. So the fact also that there's not an opportunity that our kids might have made a mistake on something, which is totally normal, right?
Yeah, that's true. I always say that when you're in your worst moment, as a human, not having your best moment shouldn't be a death sentence, right? But quite often it is for people of color, for Black people. Angelique, thank you so much for this comprehensive summary that you've given us, and I look forward to getting a copy of your research. It is phenomenal. Thank you for being here and enlightening and sharing your incredible research with us, and just very appreciative of the work that you do. It's not many people willing to delve into what you are doing, and it's research that is very much needed. Thank you so very much.
Thank you too, and I want to say thank you for your work too on the international level, because with the UN task force and looking, right, they're really indictments internationally of what's happening here, and the fact that so many people domestically have no idea what the international community is actually saying in the legal standards, and the fact that, right, with impunity, the United States is not participating, right, in being held accountable like they expect others, right? The deep hypocrisy there. So thank you for doing that.
That's so true. Thank you. Thank you again. I look to further collaboration in the future with you. Thank you so much for being here and for your research. It's just awesome. Thank you. Dana, I am going to come to let you, we're going to let Janet close out, have a few minutes to close out. We've gone over, but it's great. Sometimes you need to go over. This is our last dialogue, so it's totally okay. But what I want you to take a few moments to talk about how this grief, this trauma, this is your background, expertise is in trauma, and what you see, how families are affected, and how the resources aren't available for the families, and how the struggle is just there and families are left on their own. If you could just talk a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Gray, for your amazing research. And, I also just wanted to say, Janet, Ms. Baker, thank you. I know that you made Jordan so proud, the way you shared his story. I feel like I got to know him a little bit tonight, and I felt really teary-eyed throughout your sharing. So thank you so much. I know that took a lot, and I'm so grateful to have witnessed that. And, speaking of witnessing, we've always had a tradition at MAPB of speak outs, of people coming together. I can remember countless times just a family sharing their story, and you could hear a pin drop, everybody leaning forward, boxes of Kleenex all around. And, really, that really is the healing. We do not heal by ourselves. We heal in community. And that's really the whole basis behind the Fellowship Legacy Program, bringing up, these women who are already leaders to be even stronger leaders in the community, and to gather, people around, because that's really how the healing happens. When you tell your child's story and you can feel around you that people believe you, they know, he didn't do that, he wouldn't have done that. Mm-hmm. That's how the healing really happens. So we're all in this together to heal, and just extra gratitude to you, Ms. Baker, for your sharing tonight. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for that, Dana. I appreciate it. Janet, as we close tonight on your panel, we'd like to give, for you to have the final thoughts, be it about Jordan or whatever those final thoughts are for you. If you could close us out, that would be great.
Okay, just to close us out, I would just be so remiss if I didn't say thank you, Angelique. Oh my God, thank you. And calling her up, and she was like, sure, I'll be there for you. So thank you for that. Colette, creating the platform. And Dana, so nice to have met you, and I feel the warmth in your spirit. And to close out, I always remembered through studying that God strategically places his anointed. And I feel like we're all collectively gathered, under these horrible circumstances. But I have to believe that we're honoring our loved ones, and we are honoring what has happened to them. And to end with, for Jordan, and for the 9 fellows, I'm thinking of their beautiful faces from the beginning, and Clinton, and for you, Colette, as well as the fellows. I'm just happy to be a part of something where we're being a part of something to make change, and that's what's needed. So thank you again. And I know it's late, it's probably past a lot of dinner time, but I'm just filled with gratitude. So, and one other thing, the diminished quality of life for Jordan. And part of our work, I hope that we can bring, if they're 3/5 of human, how to make them whole and be seen as whole. So that's what I like to end with on that note.
Thank you so much for that, Janet. I want to circle again and thank our incredible panelists. Just amazing. Blake, thank you so very much for your input this evening. It was very impactful and informative and riveting and powerful. And thank you for that. And Dana, thank you for always being there to support the families. It's a unique spot, and a lot of people simply can't do it. And you do it effortless and with grace. And thank you for that. I want to thank everyone who attended these sessions all week. People tuned in and chimed in, and it was just phenomenal. It was fantastic. We chose to do this panel without the fellows being able to see how many people joined, or we took away the chat ability because we wanted them to be in a safe space to be able to voice. But I can tell you that we've had great responses, and this has been a wonderful event. And thank you to everyone who participated in the event for the fellows. And I know that Thanksgiving is coming up, and it will be a difficult time for the families, and all of you are in my prayers. And thank you again, and good night.